Hello and welcome back. Dear learners, so far in this series we have discussed about the origin, the structure and nature of Russian language. We have also discussed about the Russian alphabet, consonants and vowels. We have seen with the help of few examples that how these vowels and consonants are pronounced individually as well as when combined together. The special exercises were done to understand these vowels and consonant sounds in an efficient manner, so that while using these vowels and consonants, you will be able to understand, pronounce the words in Russian in a correct and efficient manner. We have seen in the previous sessions that how these words, verbs and expressions were used in sentences, in simple sentences as well as in complex sentences. We have seen that how with the help of da and nyat, affirmative and negative sentences were made. We have talked about the usage of possessive pronouns and personal pronouns in Russian. We have seen that how these personal pronouns were used to conjugate the verbs in Russian. As you know that in Russian, these verbs are categorized into perfective and imperfective verbs. We have seen while conjugating these verbs that the ending of these verbs are of utmost importance. We have conjugated verbs like chitach, zhich, addikhach, zavtarkach, abiedach, ujinach, etc. And accordingly, with the help of their endings, we now know that how to conjugate them according to our use and how do we put them in a sentence. Personal pronouns like ya, ti, on, ana, mui, we, ani were used while conjugating the verbs. We have also seen that how the nouns and adjective endings are in agreement. We have also discussed about gender in Russian language. As you already know that in Russian language we have masculine gender, feminine gender and neuter gender. We have also seen that how the gender of masculine, feminine and neuter gender, the nouns are being used. We have also discussed about the usage of these nouns in preposition case. In prepositional case, we have seen that the ending of masculine gender nouns as well as the nouns of feminine gender are changing. These nouns of masculine and feminine as well as neuter gender are changing according to our strict fundamental rules. We have seen that in masculine gender, whenever a question is asked while using что or где, the noun for example such as universitet changes as universitete. We have also seen that there are several such nouns which ends with soft sign like portfel changes into portfelje. We have also seen that while using prepositions va or na in Russian, which indicates in or at depending upon the context, it expresses a meaning. Accordingly, we now know that in Russian, whenever a place, name of a place or a nation, country, etc. are used, it will always be used with v. For example, в Лондоне, в Москве, в Индии, etc. We have discussed in the previous lesson about the usage of such nouns which belong to the feminine gender. Feminine gender nouns which ends with a, ya or iya. They also change whenever they are used with prepositions. We will be discussing more about the ending of the nouns which belong to the feminine gender. We have discussed that how nouns which are ending with a are changing into ye. For example, Moskva, it is a noun of feminine gender which ends with a is changing into v Moskvе. So, accordingly at the end we are cutting or dropping the a and using ye instead. Please pay attention to the next slide so that we will understand this fundamental rule when applied to feminine gender nouns. Please pay attention and listen to the exact correct pronunciation of these nouns while I read it for you. Here the feminine singular nouns which are ending in -ia, it is replaced with -e. Let us find out how. Let us take a few examples like auditoria. While we put preposition v before auditoria, it changes into vaugitore. Accordingly, fotografia changes into fotografie. Historia changes into vistore. Lecția changes into na lecție. And accordingly, there are a few more such examples. We will be paying more attention to the ending of these nouns when we talk about them in detail. A few examples were taken initially when we talked about such nouns which ends in -ia. For example, auditoria, laboratoria, etc. Auditoria changes into vaugitori. As you already know that auditoria means auditorium. It changes into vaugitori. In the auditorium, you can use accordingly fotografia, which means photograph, changes into photography, which means in the photograph. Historia, which means history, changes into vistori. Lecția, which means lecture, changes into na lecție. Conferenția, which means conference, changes into na conferențe. India, which is a name of a place, country, accordingly it changes into Vingi. Russia, which is the name of a country, Russia, is changing accordingly to the fundamental rule which we have learned in the earlier sessions. Here it is changing into Frasie. Finlandia, Finland changes into Finlandie. Dania changes into Dani, and Epponia, which means Japan, changes into Epponia. Dear learners, now since we have just learned the fundamental rules which apply to the ending of such nouns which belong to the feminine gender, here we have seen that endings which are -ia are changing into -e, like auditoria, laboratoria, and name of the places like India, Finlandia, Dania, Epponia, America, etc. Such nouns of feminine gender like Moskva, America, changes into Moskve, Amerike, and accordingly such other nouns which ends in -ia like India, Finlandia, Epponia, etc. are changing into Vingi, Finlandi, and Viponia. We will be discussing more about how the ending of such other nouns of feminine gender are changing when used with prepositions. Please look at the next slide while we discuss more about such other nouns. In Russian language, as you know, that such are the nouns which are used in feminine gender too, which ends with soft sign. Like we have just learned about, there are certain nouns which are ending with soft sign, but of masculine gender, like portfel. Accordingly, in Russian language, there are certain nouns which are of feminine gender, but they too ends with soft sign, like chitraj, ploshaj. Chitraj means notebook, changes into chitraji. Here we drop the soft sign again and put e instead of ye, as we have just learned in the case of masculine gender. Accordingly, ploshaj, which is again a word of feminine gender, changes into ploshaji. Here ploshaj changes into ploshaji, where we drop the soft sign and put e instead. We have an example of ploshaj. In the earlier lessons we have learned that в Москве находится Красная площадь. In Moscow the Red Square is situated, or simply we can say Red Square is situated in Moscow. Accordingly, we will be learning more about such fundamental rules in the coming slide. Please pay attention to the next list of such nouns which are used in feminine gender while I read it for you. Now, you know that in Russian language there are masculine gender words, feminine gender words and neuter gender words. These words or nouns which we used in Russian language, they too have exceptions. In Russian language, let us discuss a few exceptions which are very popularly and oftenly used in our day-to-day communication. Please pay attention to the list while I read it for you. You are also requested to pay attention to the pronunciation. So, whenever you use them in your day-to-day communication, you use them correctly. Dear learners, certain nouns have a special ending while answering the question где. For example, les changes into flisu, sad changes into vsadu, shkaf changes into shkafu, ugl changes into vuglu, pol changes into napalu, bereg changes into nabirigu. Accordingly, most changes into namastu. Here, if you pay attention to the list of such nouns which belong to the masculine gender words, for example, les, sad, etc., they are changing into flisu, sadu, shkafu, etc. Accordingly, you can also use these new nouns. These are the exceptionals which are used in Russian. Let us repeat once again: vlisu, sadu, shkafu, etc. These are the nouns you can also use in your own sentences. In Russian language, since it consists of such other exceptions, when we use such nouns or simply when we have our own categories of expressions and verbs, we will be discussing about these exceptions in a dedicated lesson. Let us go to the next slide and understand such other expressions in Russian with the help of certain examples. There are certain verbs in Russian where we use them with где and kuda. We will be understanding the meaning of these verbs as well as the usage of these verbs in a particular case. Please pay attention while I read it for you. These are the verbs which is used with где. They are стоять, лежать, сидеть, висеть, быть, спать, выступать, завтракать, обедать and ужинать. Dear learners, these are the verbs which we have just learned, that all these verbs which we have just listed are to be used with где. As you know that very popularly где means where, which is used in prepositional case, and accordingly such other verbs like ужинать, обедать, завтракать, работать, отдыхать, etc. are used in this case. Let us learn the meaning of these verbs now, while I read them once again for you. Please pay attention to the stress sign as well as the correct pronunciation of these verbs. You are also advised to conjugate these verbs so that you can use them in different forms, in conjugated forms in your own sentences. Please pay attention. Стоять means to stand. Лежать means to lie. Сидеть means to sit. Висеть means to hang. Быть means to be. Спать means to sleep. Выступать means to perform. Завтракать means to have breakfast, and обедать and ужинать, you already know that it means to have lunch and to have dinner, which we have discussed in the earlier lessons too. Dear learners, we will be going to the next section. We will use these verbs in our own sentences, like Утром я завтракаю. In the morning, I take breakfast. Or simply you can also use обедать and ужинать accordingly, like we have used our own expressions. Днем я обедаю и вечером я ужинаю. For example, we have just used that in the morning I have breakfast, in the afternoon I have lunch, and in the evening I eat, or simply I have my dinner. So, accordingly, whenever we are translating, we use the context, as well as you are free to use your own vocabulary where you can replace such other meanings, but within the context. We will be discussing more about the usage of verbs when we discuss them in a dedicated lesson. Let us go to the next slide, where we will discuss more about the usage of words and expressions in our own sentences. Please pay attention. Here we are listing a few expressions in a dialogue form, where you can actually understand that how to use these phrases in our day-to-day communication. As we already know that in Russian we have two forms, formal and informal. While saying greetings, we always use these two forms. When somebody who is senior or respectful to you, we use the form of вы. Accordingly, for example, we use здравствуйте for somebody who is senior or respected to us. Whenever somebody who is senior to us uses ты form. For example, здравствуй. So, accordingly, we may pay attention to the usage of all these expressions when we discuss them in detail. In a dialogue form, these are used so that you can actually understand the meaning and exact sequencing of these expressions when used in Russian. Please pay attention to the sequence and pronunciation of these expressions while I discuss this with you. Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте. Вы студент? Да, я студент. Где вы учитесь? Я учусь в университете. Dear learners, if we pay attention to the first dialogue, you can see that here when somebody is meeting someone for the first time, it is always started with V form. That is why for both characters здравствуйте had been used. Accordingly, when you assume that somebody is of your age, you can use T form. We can also use, for example, the verb in a conjugated form где вы учитесь for showing respect. And accordingly, please pay attention to the usage of prepositions. Я учусь в университете. So, accordingly, here we have used the noun университет. Here we have also used the conjugated form of учиться, я учусь. Где я учусь? Я учусь в университете. So, with the preposition в, университет changes into университете. Let us go to the next slide and understand the usage of such other verbs and expressions with the help of prepositions in Russian. Где находится ваш университет? Наш университет находится на юго-западе. Here we have used the verbs находится. Где находится ваш университет? And the next character is answering that my university is located at the юго-западе. Yug, as we already know, means south and zapad means west. So, it is the southwest. Na юго-западе. Please pay attention again to the sentence while I pronounce it for you. Где находится ваш университет? Наш университет находится на юго-западе. Когда у вас каникулы? Наши каникулы в июле и в августе. Here, if you see that we have also used the months of the year Yule and August. When it is used with prepositions v, they are changing into Yulie и в августе. Accordingly, all months of the year can be changed like this: январе, феврале, марте, and you have used such other expressions earlier also in your previous lessons. Let us take a few examples like we have done days of the week as well as the months of the year, how they are changing when used with prepositions. Days of the week: понедельник, понедельник, во вторник, во вторник, среда, среда changes into среду because it ends with a, среда, it changes into среду. Accordingly, we have четверг, четверг, пятница, в пятницу, it changes into в пятницу. If we see that how it is used in the case of суббота and воскресенье, суббота, в субботу, and воскресенье remains same, воскресенье. Here we ask the question когда, which means when. We answer them когда в понедельник, on Monday, во вторник, on Tuesday, в среду, on Wednesday, в четверг, on Thursday, в пятницу, on Friday, в субботу, on Saturday, and воскресенье, on Sunday. Accordingly, you can also use these new expressions in your own sentences. Let us go to the sentences which we were discussing, and please pay attention to the expressions and the usage of all such expressions with the help of these prepositions. Please pay attention to the sentences while I read it for you. Где вы живете сейчас? Сейчас я живу в общежитии. Где живет ваша семья? Моя семья живет в Индии, в городе Дели. If we pay attention to these sentences, here we have used где живет ваша семья. It was answered that моя семья живет в Индии, в городе Дели. For example, here we have used the verb жить in a conjugated form. We can also use мои родители живут в городе Дели, в Индии. It depending upon the context and nature of the language you are going to use while expressing your emotion. So, accordingly, you have just seen that how the preposition в, на along with the verbs like жить, работать, играть, завтракать, обедать, ужинать, etc. were used in certain sentences. Dear learners, since now we know that while using the prepositions va and na, the general question is где. In simple sentences, when we talk about what, we use no prepositions. They are simple sentences. Что это? Это мой брат. Or кто это? Simply это мой брат. Что это? Это мой карандаш. For example, you can use that. Accordingly, you have seen that with the usage of где and куда, how do we differentiate between them when they are used in a sentence? We now know that где is always used with the verbs which are used in prepositional case, and куда, it always indicates movement, and that is why they are always used with verbs of motion like идти, ходить, ехать and ездить. It is very interesting that in Russian as well we have different tenses. So far we have all been discussing the construction of sentences in present form. We will more be discussing about how to change the conjugated forms of verbs in past tense as well as the usage of such verbs in future tense. This will further enrich your vocabulary as well as your learning experience of Russian. Since Russian as we have already been discussing, that is a Russian is a rich language, and accordingly the usage of all these aspects of the language will be discussed in detailed manner. So far in this lesson we have discussed the endings of masculine gender nouns, how they are changing into prepositional case. We have also discussed the ending of neuter gender and feminine gender nouns. To make it clear for you, we have given certain examples. Now, we also know that the ending of these nouns are changed according to fundamental rules as well as certain set patterns. We have also seen that beyond this there is a group of such nouns which does not fall into any category, and that is why they are called exceptions, like sad changes into sadu, les changes into vlisu, pol changes into napalu, etc. Dear learners, in this lessons we have covered about the ending of the nouns according to their genders in prepositional case. We will be discussing more about other cases in Russian in our next lessons. As now we are progressing towards the grammar of Russian language in a detailed manner, we will be paying more attention to the forms of nouns, verbs, and will be using all expressions in Russian. Here I would like to conclude this lesson, and thank you.